It has been said that the gods play games with the lives of men. When it comes to some men, however, they have a particularly twisted sense of humor. A Man of Means by P.J. Wodehouse. Part 1. The Episode of the Landlady's Daughter. Read by Karl. When a seed merchant of cautious disposition and an eye to the Maine chanced to receive from an eminent firm of jam manufacturers an extremely large order for clover seed, his emotions are mixed. Joy may be said to predominate, but with the joy also comes uncertainty. Are these people, he asked himself, proposing to set up as farmers on a large scale, or do they merely want the seed to give verisimilitude to their otherwise bland and unconvincing raspberry jam? On the solution of this problem depends the important matter of price, for obviously you can charge a fraudulent jam disseminator in a manner which an honest farmer would resent. This was a problem which was furrowing the brow of Mr. Julian Feinberg, of Bury St. Edwards, one sunny morning when Roland Bleak knocked at his door. And such was his difficulty that only the 19th knock did Mr. Feinberg raise his head. "Come in, that dashed woodpecker out there," he shouted, for it was his habit to express himself with a generous strength towards the junior members of his staff. The young man who entered looked exactly like a second clerk in a provincial seed merchant's office, which, strangely enough, he chanced to be. His chief characteristic was an intense ordinariness. He was a young man, and when you had said that of him, you had said everything. There was nothing which you would have noticed about him, except for the fact that there was nothing to notice. His age was 22, and his name was Roland Bleak. "Please, sir, it's about my salary." Mr. Feinberg, at the word, drew himself together much as the British square at Waterloo must have drawn itself together at the sight of a squadron of cuirassiers. "Salary?" he cried. "What about it? What's the matter with it? You get it, don't you?" "Yes, sir, but—" "Well, don't stand there like an idiot. What is it?" "It's too much." Mr. Feinberg's brain reeled. It was improbable that the money could arrive with a jerk. On the other hand, he distinctly heard one of his clerks complain that the salary was too large. He pinched himself. "Say that again," he said. "If you could see your way to reduce it, sir." It occurred to Mr. Feinberg that for one instant that his subordinate was endeavoring to be humorous, but a glance at Roland's face dispelled that idea. "Why do you want it reduced?" "Please, sir, I'm going to be married." "What the deuce do you mean?" "Well, my salary reaches £150, sir. It's £140 now, so if you could see your way to knocking off £10. Mr. Feinberg saw light. He was a married man himself. "My boy," he said genially, "I quite understand, but I can do better than that. It's no use doing this sort of thing in a small way. For now on, your salary is £110. No, don't thank me. You're an excellent clerk. It's a pleasure for me to reward merit when I find it. Close the door after you." And Mr. Feinberg returned with a lighter heart to the great clover-seed problem. The circumstances which had led Roland to approach his employer may be briefly recounted. Since joining the staff of Mr. Feinberg, he had lodged at the house of a Mr. Coppin, in honorable employment as porter of the local railway station. The Coppin family, excluding domestic pets, consisted of Mr. Coppin, a kindly and garrulous man of 60, Mrs. Coppin, a somewhat negative personality, most of whose life was devoted to cooking and washing up in her underground lair, brothers Frank and Percy, gentlemen of leisure, probably supposed to be engaged in the mysterious occupation known as looking about for something, and lastly, Muriel. For some months after his arrival, Muriel had been to Roland Bleak a mere automaton, a something outside himself that was made only for neatly laid breakfast tables and silent removal of plates at dinner. Gradually, however, when his natural shyness was soothed by use sufficiently to enable him to look at her when she came into the room, he discovered she was a strikingly pretty girl, bounded to the north by a mass of auburn hair and to the south by small and shapely feet. She also possessed what, we are informed, we are told in these matters ourselves, is known as the RSVP eye. This eye had met Roland's one evening, as he chumped his chop. Before he knew what he was doing, he remarked that it had been a fine day. From that wonderful moment, matters had developed at an incredible speed. Roland had his nice sense of the social proprieties. He could not bring himself to ignore a girl with whom he had once exchanged easy conversation about the weather. Whenever she came to lay his table, he felt bound to say something. Not being an experienced gagger, he found it more and more difficult each evening to hit on something bright, until finally, from sheer lack of inspiration, he kissed her. If matters had progressed rapidly before, they went like lightning then. It was as if he had touched a spring or pressed a button, setting vast machinery in motion. Even as he reeled back stunned at his audacity, the room became suddenly full of Coppins of every variety known to science. Through a mist he was aware of Mrs. Coppin crying on a corner, of Mr. Coppin drinking his health in the remains of sparkling limado, of brothers Frank and Percy, one on each side trying to borrow simultaneously half-crowns, and of Muriel, flushed but demure, making red pellets and throwing them in an abstracted way, one by one, at the Coppin cat, which had wandered in on the chance of fish. Out of the chaos, as he stood looking and with his mouth open, came the word "banns," and smote him like a blast of east wind. It is not necessary to trace in detail Roland's mental processes from the moment till the day when he applied to Mr. Farnberg for a reduction of salary. It's enough to say that for quite a month he was extraordinarily happy. To a man who has had nothing to do with women, to be engaged is an intoxicating experience, and at first life was one long golden go to Roland. Secretly, like all mild men, he had always nurtured a desire to be esteemed a nut by his fellow men, and his engagement satisfied that desire. It was pleasant to hear brothers Frank and Percy cough knowingly when he came in. It was pleasant to walk abroad with a girl like Muriel in the capacity of the accepted wooer. Above all, it was pleasant to sit holding Muriel's hand and watch the ill-conceived efforts of Mr. Albert Potter to hide his mortification. Albert was a mechanic in the motor works round the corner. Hitherto Roland had always felt something of a worm in his presence. Albert was so infernally strong and silent and efficient. He could dissect a car and put it together again. He could drive through the thickest traffic. He could sit silent in company without having his silence attributed to shyness or imbecility. But he could not get engaged to Muriel Coppin. That was reserved for Roland Bleak, the nut, the dasher, the young man of affairs. It was all very well being able to tell a spark plug from a commutator at sight. When it came to a contest in the affair of the heart with a man like Roland, Albert was in his proper place, third at the pole. Probably, if he could have gone on merely being engaged, Roland would never have tired of the experience. But the word marriage began to creep more and more into the family conversation, and suddenly panic descended upon Roland Bleak. All his life he had had a horror of definite appointments. An invitation to tea a week ahead had been enough to poison life for him. He was one of those young men whose souls revolt at the thought of planning out any definite step. He could do things on the spur of the moment, but plans made him lose his nerve. By the end of the month his whole being was crying out to him in agonized tones, "Get me out of this. Do anything you like, but get me out of this frightful marriage business." If anything had been needed to emphasize his desire for freedom, the attitude of Frank and Percy would have supplied it. Every day they made it clear that the man who married Muriel would be no stranger to them. It would be his pleasing task to support them, too, in the style to which they had become accustomed. They conveyed the idea that they went with Muriel as a sort of bonus. The Coppin family were at high tea when Roland reached home. It was a general stir of interest as he entered the room, for as known he left that morning with the intent of approaching Mr. Feinberg on the important matter of a rise in salary. Mr. Coppin removed his saucer of tea from his lips. Frank brushed the tail of a sardine from the corner of his mouth. Percy ate his haddock in an undertone. Albert Potter, who was present, glowered silently. Roland shook his head with the nearest approach to gloom which his rejoicing heart would permit. "I'm afraid I've bad news." Mrs. Coppin burst into tears, her invariable practice in any crisis. Albert Potter's face relaxed into something resembling a smile. "He won't give you your raise?" Roland sighed. "He's reduced me." "Reduced you?" "Yes. Times are bad just present, so he had to lower me to 110. The collected jaws of the family fell as one. Maria herself seemed to be bearing the news with fortitude, but the rest were stunned. Frank and Percy might have been posing for a picture of men who had lost their fountain pens. Beneath the table, the hand of Albert Potter found the hand of Muriel Coppin and held it. And Muriel, we regret to add, turned and bestowed upon Albert a half smile of tender uh, understanding. "I suppose," said Roland, "we couldn't get married on 110?" "No," said Percy. "No," said Frank. "No," said Albert Potter. They all spoke decidedly, but Albert the most decidedly of the three. "Then," said Roland regretfully, "I'm afraid we must wait." It seemed to be the general verdict that they must wait. Muriel said that they thought they must wait. Albert Potter, whose opinion no one had asked, was quite certain they must wait. Mrs. Coppin, between sobs, moaned that it would be best to wait. Frank and Percy, morosely devouring bread and jam, so they supposed they would have to wait. And to end the painful scene, Roland drifted silently from the room and went upstairs to his own quarters. There was a telegram on the mantel. "Some fellows," he soliloquized happily as he opened it, "wouldn't have been able to manage a little thing like that. They would have given themselves away. They would—" The contents of the telegram demanded his attention. For some time they conveyed nothing to him. The thing might have been written in Hindustani. It would have been quite appropriate if it had been, for it was from the promoters of the Calcutta sweep, and informed him that, as the holder of ticket number 1008,694, he had drawn guillotine, and in recognition of this fact, a cheque for £500 would be forwarded to him in due course. Roland's first feeling was one of pure bewilderment. As far as he could recollect, he never had any dealings whatsoever with these open-handed gentlemen. Then Mary opened her floodgates and swept him back to a morning ages ago, so it seemed to him, when Mr. Fineberg's eldest son, Ralph, passing through the office on his way to borrow money from his father, had offered him for 10 shillings down a piece of cardboard, at the same time saying something about a sweep. Partly from a vaguish desire to keep in with the Fineberg clan, but principally because it struck him as rather a doggish thing to do, Roland had passed over the 10 shillings, and now, as far as he had known, the matter had ended. And now, after all this time, the simple action had borne fruit in the shape of guillotine and a cheque for £500. Roland's next emotion was triumph. Sudden entry of cheques for £500 over a man's life is apt to produce this result. For the space of some minutes he gloated, and the reaction set in. £500 meant marriage with Muriel. His brain worked quickly. He must conceal this thing. With trembling fingers he felt for his matchbox, struck a match, and burnt the telegram to ashes. Then, feeling a little better, he sat down to think the whole matter over. The meditations put a certain amount of balm. After all, he felt, the thing could quite easily be kept a secret. He would receive the cheque in due course, as stated, and would bicycle over to the neighboring town of Lexingham and start a bank account with it. Nobody would know, and life would go on as before. He went to bed and slept peacefully. It was about a week after this, and he was roused out of a deep sleep at 8 o'clock in the morning to find his room full of Coppins. Mr. Coppin was there in a nightshirt and his official trousers. Mrs. Coppin was there, weeping softly in a brown dressing gown. Modesty had apparently kept Muriel from the gathering. Her brothers Frankie and Percy stood at his bedside, shaking by the shoulders and shouting. Mr. Coppin thrust a newspaper at him as he sat up blinking. These epic moments are best related swiftly. Roland took the paper, and the first thing that met his sleepy eye and effectually drove the sleep from his mind was this headline: Romance of the Calcutta Sweepstakes. Beneath it, in another in type almost as large as the first, poor Clark wins £40,000. His own heart leapt at him from the printed page, and with that of the faithful guillotine. Flight. That was the master word which ran in Roland's mind as day followed day. The wild desire of the trapped animal to be anywhere except just where he was had come upon him. He was past the stage when conscience could have kept him to his obligations. He ceased to think of anything or anyone but himself. All he asked to fate was to remove him from Bury St. Edwards on any terms. It may be that some inkling of his state of mind was wafted telepathically to Frank and Percy, for it cannot be denied that their behavior at this juncture was more than a little reminiscent of the police force. Perhaps it was simply their natural anxiety to keep an eye on what they had already considered their own private gold mine that made them so adhesive. Certainly there was no hour of the day when one or the other was not in Roland's immediate neighborhood. The vigilance even extended to the night hours, and once, when Roland, having tossed sleeplessly on his bed, got up at 2 in the morning, with a wild idea of staying out of the house and walking to London, a door opened as he reached the top of the stairs, and a voice asked him what he thought he was doing. The statement that he was walking to sleep was accepted, but coldly. Well, shortly after this, having by dint of extraordinary strategy eluded the bars and reached the railway station, Roland, with his ticket to London in his pocket and his express already entering the station, was engaged in conversation by old Mr. Coppin, who appeared from nowhere to denounce the high cost of living in a speech that lasted until the taillights of the train had vanished and brothers Frank and Percy arrived panting. A man has only a certain capacity for battling with fate. After this last episode, Roland gave in. Not even the exquisite agony of hearing himself described in church as the bachelor of this parish, with the grim addition that this was for the second time of asking, could stir him to a fresh dash for liberty. Although the shadow of the future occupied Roland's mind almost to the exclusion of everything else, he was still capable of suffering a certain amount of additional torment from the present. One of the things which made the present a source of misery to him was the fact he was expected to behave more like a mad millionaire than a sober young man with a knowledge of the value of money. His mind, trained from infancy to a decent respect for the pence, had not yet adjusted itself to the possession of large means, and the open-handed rule forced upon him by his family appalled him. When the coppers wanted anything, they asked for it. It seemed to Roland that they wanted pretty nearly everything. If Mr. Coppin had reached his present age without the assistance of a cold watch, he might have struggled along to the end on gunmetal. In any case, a man of his years should be thinking of higher things than mere gauds and trinkets. A light criticism applied to Mrs. Coppin's demand for a silk petticoat, which struck Roland as simply indecent. Frank and Percy took theirs mostly in specie. It was Muriel who struck the worst blow by insisting on a hired motor car. Roland hated motor cars, especially when driven by Albert Potter, as this one was. Albert, that strong, silent man, had but one way of expressing his emotions, namely to open the throttle and shave the paint off trolley cars. Disappointed love was giving Albert a great deal of discomfort this time, and he only found it made him feel better to go round corners on 2 wheels. As Muriel sat next to him on these expeditions, Roland squashing into the tonneau with Frank and Percy, his torments were subtle. He was not given a chance to forget, and the only way in which he could obtain a momentary diminution of the agony was to increase the speed to 60 miles an hour. It was in this fashion that they journeyed to the neighboring town of Lexingham to see Monsieur Etienne Ferraud perform his feat of looping the loop in his aeroplane. It was Mother Frank's idea that they should make up a party to go and see him. Frank was one of those generous, unspoiled natures which never goes blasé at the sight of a fellow human taking a sporting chance at Harry-Carry. He was a well-known figure at every wild animal exhibition within a range of 50 miles, and this pilot drew him like a magnet. The biter goes up, he explains, as he conducts the party into the arena, and he stands on his head and goes round in circles. I've seen pictures of it. It appeared that Monsieur Ferrat did even more than this. Posted from the ground advertised the fact that, on receipt of £5, he would take up a passenger with him. To date, however, there appears to have been no rush on the part of the canny inhabitants of Lexingham to avail themselves of this chance of a breath of fresh air. The man in question, a small man with a chubby and amiable face, wandered about signing picture cards and smoking a lighted cigarette, looking a little disappointed. Albert Potter was scornful. "A lot of rabbits," he said. "Where's their pluck? I suppose they call themselves Englishmen. I'd go up precious quick if I had a £5 note. Disgrace, I call it, letting a Frenchman have the laugh of us." It was a long speech from Mr. Potter, and it drew a look of respectful tenderness from Muriel. "You're so brave, Mr. Potter," she said. Whether it was the slight emphasis which he put on the first word, or whether it was sheer generosity that impelled him, one could not say, but Roland produced the required sum even while she spoke. He offered it to his rival. Mr. Potter started, turned a little pale, drew himself up and waved the note aside. I take no favors, he said with dignity. There was a pause. Why don't you do it? Said Albert nastily. £5 is nothing to you. Why should I? Ah, why should you? It would be useless to assert that Mr. Potter's tone was friendly. It stung Roland. Seeing him that Maria was looking at him in an unpleasantly contemptuous manner. In some curious fashion, without doing anything to merit it, he would apparently become an object of scorn and derision to the party. All right then, I will, he said suddenly. Easy enough to talk, said Albert. Roland strode with a pale but determined face to the spot where Monsieur Farad, beaming politely, was signing a picture postcard. Some feeling of compunction appeared to come to Muriel at the 11th hour. Don't let him, she cried. Her brother Frank was made of sterner stuff. It was precisely the sort of thing which, in his opinion, made for a jolly afternoon. For years he'd been waiting for something of this kind. He was experiencing that pleasant thrill which comes to a certain type of person when the victim of a murder in the morning paper is an acquaintance of theirs. What are you talking about? He said. There's no danger. At least not much. He might easily come down all right. Besides, he wants to. What do you want to go interfering for? Roland returned. The negotiations with the Birdman had lasted a little longer than one would have expected. But then again, Monsieur Farad was a foreigner, and Roland's French was not fluent. He took Muriel's hand. Goodbye, he said. He shook hands with the rest of the party, even with Albert Potter. Struck Frank he was making too much fuss for a trifle, and worse, delaying the start of the proceedings. What's it all about? He demanded. You go on as if we're never going to see you again. You never know. It's as safe as being in bed. But still, in case we never meet again. Oh well, said Brother Frank, and took the outstretched hand. The little party stood and watched as the aeroplane moved swiftly along the ground, rose and soared into the air. Higher and higher it rose, till the features of the two occupants were almost invisible. Now, Brother Frank, just watch. Now he's going to loop the loop. But the wheels of the aeroplane still pointed to the ground. It grew smaller and smaller. It was a mere speck. What the dickens? Far away to the west, something showed against the blue of the sky. Something that might have been a bird, a toy kite, or an aeroplane traveling rapidly into the sunset. 4 pairs of eyes followed it in rapt silence. End of part 1.